When I was a little girl, my family made sure I knew exactly where I stood. At the bottom. My parents adored my older sister of Lila. She was the gifted one, the beautiful one, the hope of the family. Me? I was the quiet shadow in the corner of every family picture. My mother used to tell me, "You're too sensitive, Claire. Toughen up if you want to survive in this world." My father would nod in agreement while reading his newspaper, as if I were a mild inconvenience instead of his daughter. Even my birthdays were a reminder that I didn't belong. When Lila turned 16, they threw her a lavish party with lights, decorations, and a rented ballroom. When I turned 16, they handed me a gift card and told me not to make a mess in the kitchen. The only people who ever truly cared about me were my grandparents, Henry and Eleanor. They lived in an old countryside estate, quiet and grand, with the scent of pine and the sound of wind brushing through the fields. Whenever I felt small or invisible, I'd take the 2-hour bus ride to their house. They never asked questions. They'd just make tea, pull me into a warm hug, and tell me stories about resilience, love, and legacy. My grandfather used to say, "Claire, when the world turns its back on you, don't chase it. Build your own world and they'll come knocking one day." At that time, I thought it was just an old man's wisdom. Now, I know it was prophecy. After high school, I applied for scholarships because my parents refused to pay a dime for my college. "Why waste money?" my father said. "You're not going to amount to much anyway." Those words burned a hole in my soul. I studied harder than I ever had before. I worked nights at a diner, barely sleeping. Meanwhile, my sister Lila dropped out of college after her first year and came home, blaming the professors for not understanding her creative spirit. Yet, my parents still treated her like a princess. When I finally graduated, top of my class, they didn't even show up. Only my grandparents did. My grandmother cried and said, "You've always been our brightest light, Claire. Never let them dim you again." A year later, my grandparents' health began to fail. My parents barely visited them, except to ask about inheritance and property. But I was there, every weekend, managing their medications, organizing their paperwork, helping them with groceries. When my grandfather passed, my heart shattered. But I made a silent promise over his coffin. I'd protect what he built. A few months later, my grandmother, frail and tired, called me to her bedside. She took my hand and whispered, "Claire, everything your grandfather and I worked for, it's all going to you. But promise me one thing, protect it." I nodded, tears running down my face. With her lawyer present, she changed the will. She set up a trust, naming me as sole trustee of their entire $3 million estate, not to spend recklessly, but to preserve it for the future, as they always wanted. When my grandmother passed, I did exactly that. I quietly placed the estate into a legal trust under my name, protected from any claim. I didn't brag. I didn't tell anyone. I just followed their wishes. Months later, I was working as a junior analyst in a small firm, living modestly. Then one Sunday afternoon, there was a knock on my apartment door. When I opened it, my parents and sister stood there, smiling. Fake polished smiles, the kind that feel like knives. My mother gasped, pretending to be emotional. "Oh my God, Claire, you've lost weight. You look so mature." My father laughed. "Our little girl's all grown up." Lila stepped forward with glossy lips and a voice dripping with sugar. "I heard you're managing Grandma and Grandpa's estate. That must be stressful. Maybe we can help." Help. That word almost made me laugh out loud. They ignored me my entire life. They dismissed my pain, mocked my dreams, and abandoned me when I needed them most. Now they were suddenly concerned about my stress. I invited them in, partly out of politeness, partly out of curiosity. They looked around my small apartment, probably judging every piece of cheap furniture. After a few minutes of meaningless chatter, my father finally said what they came for. "So about the estate, your grandmother's house, the investments, the savings. We were thinking maybe you should let the family handle things together." Leela smiled sweetly. "You know, it's too much responsibility for one person. We can all share it." That was the moment I realized they didn't come for me. They came for the money. I leaned back and smiled, calm, controlled. "Actually," I said, "Grandma and Grandpa were very clear. The estate is in a trust. I'm just following their instructions." My mother frowned. "A trust? You mean you own it?" "Not exactly," I said. "It's protected. No one can access it without my authorization, including me." Their smiles faded. Leela's tone changed. That's ridiculous. It's family money. Exactly, I said quietly. Family money that only family valued. There was silence. For the first time, they didn't have a script. My father's face turned red. This isn't fair. You think you're better than us? I looked him straight in the eye. No. I just learned from the best manipulators. He opened his mouth to argue, but I stood up. You know, you never came to a single graduation. You never asked how I survived those nights alone. But now that there's something to take, you remember I exist. My mother tried to change her tone. Claire, we just want what's best for everyone. I smiled softly. So did Grandma. That's why she trusted me, not you. They left soon after, their fake smiles gone, replaced by bitterness. As the door closed behind them, I felt something I'd never felt before. Peace. Weeks passed. Lila tried calling me, leaving sweet voice notes about sticking together as sisters. My parents emailed me, asking for small loans, for emergencies. I didn't reply. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter. It was from their lawyer. Apparently my parents were trying to challenge the will, claiming emotional coercion. I smiled as I handed the letter to my own attorney. He looked at me and said, "Don't worry, they don't have a case. The trust is airtight." And it was. I'd made sure of that. The court dismissed their claim within weeks. They lost, completely. That night, I sat on the porch of my grandparents' old house, now beautifully maintained and quiet. The same wind that once carried my grandfather's laughter brushed against my skin. I whispered, "I did it, Grandpa. I protected what you built." For years, I chased love from people who were incapable of giving it. Now, I no longer needed their approval. I had something far greater: self-respect and control. They could keep their fake smiles. I had peace. Month later, I decided to use a portion of the estate's income for something that would have made my grandparents proud. A scholarship fund for underprivileged girls pursuing finance and law. Because no girl should ever feel powerless in the face of manipulation and greed. When the scholarship was announced, local media covered it. My parents saw my picture on the news, smiling in front of a banner with my grandparents' names on it. They called again. This time, they didn't sound fake. They sounded desperate. I didn't pick up. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet, graceful, and absolute. Mine was all three. They ignored me when I was invisible. Now they have to watch me shine, and know that they'll never be part of my light again.